Okay, so any of you who were at last year's conference or the conference we had in Athlone earlier this year will have seen some of this already. But this is just to explain by background the size of the problem that we're working on in flooding around Athlone and along the Shannon. It's very important to have a measure of what the problem is. So looking at that lake, we know the Dutch have very big rivers. We discovered that, having thought we had big rivers. We discovered it when we went visiting earlier this year. But the width of that lake, it's 105 square kilometres in area, and it's a massive lake. And it's only one of 3 lakes on the Shannon. It's the second biggest, and it happens to be just above Athlone. And above this is Loch Allen. Any water, and I suppose this is where a little analogy, like a train leaves, let's say Cavan, where the Shannon rises, in the Colga Mountains, and it's like a train. It's gathering rain. The river's gathering rainwater, and as the train progresses down. So the Shannon is picking up rain from the catchment area all the way along its path. And it's growing and growing all the way with no outlet. It can only go down the river till it gets to Shannon and out to sea. So that just puts some sort of scale on the size of the problem, and that we gauge how we can respond to that. Here we are approaching Athlone, a much narrower channel with that lake above it, coming down to the new bypass bridge and the battery water tower in the background there. And you can see it's a much narrower channel, and all the time the same amount of water has to get down through that narrow channel, and that forces a slowing down of the conveyance of water. And if we can't continue to let that water down through the system, it can only go out in a natural way into the floodplain, and that's what flooding is, a natural response to too much water in the system. So the Jolly Mariner, as I knew it as a youngster, now a very polished-looking marina and dwelling area, obviously prone to flooding, and I think Ray and some of his colleagues are here today, who are very interested in making sure that we're keeping our eye on water levels in the Shannon. So into the docks, and believe it or not, this was July 15, I think. 16. The water level we're seeing here is a normal summer level, if you wish. But when we're in flood conditions, all that stonework is covered in water. That's how high it rises. It's right up to the back of the steps under the trees in Burgess Park. So here we have an early example, and I believe the Dutch got their idea for those polders and stuff from our attempts here in South Athlone. So clearly people who have had their own view of how to be resilient and how to protect their properties, whether it's farm property or dwelling, they've put a mound, a berm, to try and keep the water out. Clearly, you have to ask yourself, where's planning in all of this? Because this is a floodplain, and there are signs of new dwellings, relatively new dwellings here, and it is just madness building in those areas. So we're approaching Meelick here. This is highly edited, by the way, so it does jump around a bit. And I'm going to jump back a bit. You can see here a digger on the right-hand side, sitting in the weir at Meelick. And I'm going to skip back to something in a second, but that digger hasn't done any work. It's not there now, but when we shot that video, it hadn't done any work in years. But it sat there. Here we have Minister Moran mentioned this morning about protecting Golden Island. So you can see a berm, a man-made bank along here, which was developed over the years to try and protect that shopping district, because clearly it's the main shopping district in Athlone. So these measures do work. It costs money, but they're there. The meadows, where we used to have the gymkhana. So we're just jumping a little bit around here, back to that early version of a polder. So here we are in Meelick, and this is what rocked my boat, if the pun isn't too vibrant, when we went and visited Meelick, and saw the decay and the complete and utter neglect that this indicated. And Melik is only an example of that neglect, but it tells a story. It tells a hell of a story. And I mean, that weir, which the Minister has now mentioned will be removed, as you can see, there was only one choice, well, maybe two choices. Refurbish it completely at great cost, or remove it. And the Minister has chosen to remove it. But clearly it hasn't been functioning as a proper water control measure for many, many years. So this is south of that weir, and you'll see that there is a healthy water flow through it, probably most of which is probably coming through the sluice gates, because the water and the weir were not at the level where the weir was functioning on that particular day. So plenty of water flow in it, lovely bit of fishing water, but completely and utterly neglected in terms of management of any sort. I mean, John Joe Collier, I think, mentioned earlier about how the canals in Dublin are maintained and managed. I mean, this is exactly a plan of no management, how to utterly neglect something and let it decay. So the purpose of showing you this is that we will have highlighted what happens when something is just neglected. Okay, so this is on the main river channel, the main Shannon channel, and I just happened to, when we were down recently, about a month ago, looking at the works at Muckinish, I just happened to come across this area here, and it just shows just decaying trees that have fallen into the river, into the main channel of the river, and weed and grasses and reeds build up around it. Here's quite a large tree that's lying into the river path, and clearly that will slow down the flow of water. I don't believe that one tree will cause us a problem, but this is just an indicator of work that needs to be in some business plan. It needs to be part of a management plan, and it's not rocket science to work with this form of decay and neglect, but it needs to be managed. Clearly, a lot more work to be done, and something like this may have been what was part of the works that Minister Moran and the OPW's work package was at Muckinish, at the new cut, which we're coming to shortly. So. Okay, so this is the new cut, which has been referred to by the Minister, and is the historic work that's happened recently on the Shannon. The first bit was the neck of the new cut feeding, and you can see the boat coming down the main channel there in the background. So feeding down into this, and on this shot you can actually see the profile of what was hanging into the water channel, and you can see there's a silt barrier boom there, and that represents how far out that silt went. So you can sort of get an idea of a job well done, not enormous in terms of its length, but if you take on board that for every ton of silt that was removed from this part of the new cut, 1,000 litres of water can replace it. Now, if the water happens to be flowing, that's 1,000 litres, or in old money, 220 gallons. That's 1,000 litres per second can flow down the new cut that couldn't do it before. So here's the extracted silt. The source of it should be investigated. It's clearly not very suitable for a modern river course to function, to have that level of debris and silt in it. So this is looking back up from a bridge, looking back up the new cut from where the previous images were shown, and you can see the trees right along both sides, hanging over in it, not causing any problem at the moment. But should they become damaged in a storm or the water level rises, all it takes is a bough of a branch to get detached, and suddenly we have a sluice gate blocked, and that will back up water. Here we are, as you can see, a good healthy flow going down through, and this is post the works done by the OPW and as discussed by the Minister. Here we are looking from the sluice gates, I think they call them Marlborough sluice gates, shooting downstream. Actually, we're shooting at the Marlborough sluices straight down there. But you can see that there's quite a lot of obstacles for the watercourse there. So I think that's my. Sorry, just give us that. So I'm going to stop at that point and say my colleague here, Tom, has some messages and some thanks to say. So thank you very much.